Welcome, guys. My name's Kerry Molster, and I'm here today representing Neurorocket. So, Neurorocket is a Nottingham-based social enterprise supporting neurodivergent adults to live their best life. We work with adults at different stages of their lives, and we currently offer both one-to-one support and also some group programs. We educate about specific neurodivergence. We provide support for adults seeking work and also for people already in work. And one of the most important parts of what we do is build peer networks. So today I brought along Alice Hasty, who's one of our trusted partners that we work closely with. Alice supports our clients with her access to work expertise. So today, the webinar we're doing is part of one of many webinars. We do webinars monthly, sometimes a few different ones per month. And those webinars are designed to support employers to better understand how they can implement access to work, as well as supporting the individuals. But today's session is going to be all about supporting people transitioning into work for adults with multiple disadvantage. We know that access to work is a massive topic, okay, and it's really difficult to navigate. So today we're planning to go through just an overview of what we believe to be are the most relevant topics for you guys. However, we're also going to give you links at the end to the public webinars that I just mentioned. So we have a whole series on getting more general information. Anyone can access these for free. Also, we do have some funds available to pay for one-to-one advice sessions with Alice. Our organisation can fund that. So if you're looking for specific information that you can't find today, then we can find that. However, we prefer you to go through the webinar process first of all, so we don't use up time on things that you can find out through our other webinars. All right, so today's talk is going to be in 5 sections, and Alice is actually going to be doing the majority of speaking, not me. And we're going to do quite a bit of speaking, but also we're going to be breaking it up with some questions from me and also some Mentimeters. I know that we've used Mentimeters in these sessions before because I attend these sessions with you guys. We're going to start off by giving you an overview of access to work, and then we're going to talk you through the relevant parts that relate to the service users who are transitioning into work. And then we're then going to go on to look at some practical case studies. And we're going to talk about those in relation to employment, supported employment, and also in relation to when people have got their own work. And then the last thing we're going to look at is how we can help you guys or them going forward with all the different types of support that are available. So let's start off with our first mentee of the session. And find out, before we get started, how familiar, where you guys are up to in terms of understanding the topic before we get going. So I'm going to share with you a QR code from Mentimeter. That's the easiest way to actually get access to the Menti. Let me just do that. Because if you can use the QR code, it takes you straight to the activity that we're doing. Alternatively, if you don't use QR codes or you want to go the other way, you can go into menti.com and enter in the code. And the code will carry on the next page. So just going to give you a minute or so to do that. Excuse me. And then we'll get started. All right. If you're not on yet, don't worry, you can catch up as we go through. All right, first question then. So what's your current understanding of access to work? Here we're going to be looking at, have you used it? Have you not used it? How confused are you? Alrighty then. So we seem to have a common one. We've got an idea what it is, but it's never been used, Alice. So that's for you to work with. But we've got a nice range across the board. Someone's used it well and understands it well, which is fantastic. Yeah, it can be one of the most difficult things there is to navigate. Right, let's move on to the next one. And does anybody have any ideas what support? So this is a support scheme set up by the government. Does anyone have any ideas? Just going to give you a minute. I'm not going to torture you. What you can get from Access to Work. I often hear some very random things when I'm meeting with people for the first time that they've heard that they can get funded. So let's find out. All right, I think that's most people have entered into that. So it's quite interesting that we know it's funding, but what's the funding for? So unfortunately, the funding got to be for something quite specific. They won't, unfortunately, just give us money, which is a shame. Yeah, reasonable adjustments is quite high up there, but mostly unsure. All right, Alice. So I'm going to just stop sharing that. And Alice will now share her slides.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Kerry. Hello, everybody. I'm Alice Hasty, as Kerry said. I live, breathe, sleep, everything, access to work, which is a dream about access to work. So just for this first section, I'm just going to take you through a basic understanding of what the access to work scheme is so that we've all got some foundational knowledge, because I know there's some of you said in that first poll there that you don't really have any idea what access to work is. So just kind of bring us all up to the same standard of knowledge. So this is the top tier statement. Access to work. Aim of the scheme is to help you get or stay in work if you have a physical or mental health condition or disability. Now, I'm just going to clarify some of that. When they say help to get you in work, we're going to cover that in a minute in the next section, but they don't really mean finding work, working out what job to do, that kind of stuff. They mean making you not attractive to an employer, but employers not seeing your disability as a barrier. And when they say physical or mental health condition or disability, this does not have to meet the Equality Act definition of disability. You don't have to be affected in a day-to-day, in your day-to-day life, but you do have to be affected in the workplace. So it's a slightly less onerous standard of disability, and it does include neurodivergent conditions, which is obviously what we're talking about today. And the key thing is you don't need to have a diagnosis of that. So as long as somebody can explain how they're affected, access to work will take that as evidence of disability. So in terms of eligibility for the scheme, who's eligible? Well, you've got to be at least 16. There's no upper age limit, but you do have to be over 16 and living and working in Great Britain. So Northern Ireland does have its own scheme, and there's some exclusions around some of the various islands, which have escaped me the names of them, but ones that are not part of mainland Britain. You do need to have a disability, illness, or health condition that affects your ability to work. So somebody might have a diagnosis, but actually they don't feel that it affects them at work, in which case they wouldn't be eligible for the Access to Work grant. There does need to be barriers, there does need to be difficulty. And as I say, that does not need to be diagnosed, and it doesn't need to be permanent. Again, doesn't have to meet that definition of disability under the Equality Act. If you have a temporary disability, then that can also be eligible for support. You do have to be in employment or self-employment. This is a scheme that is very much about people in work. So you either have to have a firm job offer, so you have to have a start date, and your grant is basically awarded for your employment. So if you lose that employment, your grant will go away. Or let's say you end up not starting that job, you don't get the support anyway. You have to be in the job to get the support. When we talk about an employment, we mean paid employment, with some caveats, which I'll cover in a minute, particularly because we're talking about people transitioning into work. But generally, the expectation is that people are earning minimum wage. There's not a number of hours they have to work a week, but they do need to be meeting that minimum wage. Volunteering is never eligible for access to work. And then self-employment. So people are as eligible for access to work if they're self-employed or run their own business as anyone else, but they will need to demonstrate through access to work that business is going to be financially viable before access to work puts money into it. So normally if you're starting a business, that would be with a business plan and a financial forecast. And if you've been running your business for a year or two, so you have some accounts, then it will be demonstrating turnover of £6,500 in accounts. So it's not a very high bar for financial eligibility, but there is a criteria there. So in terms of the support provided, people often don't really understand what access to work is quite reasonably. It's very different to other schemes. So it's disability support, but it's not a benefit. So it's not the same as PIP or ESA, sorry, personal independence payments or employment support allowance. So it is a grant. They are very much a grant provider. There's no statutory right to access to work. It's a discretionary grant that the government gives you once you've made a case for it. So I'll just cover, first of all, the one part of access to work that isn't a grant, where it's actually a done-for-you service, and that's the mental health support service. And although that can be accessed through the normal access to work route, actually people can self-refer at any time as long as they are in employment. So they can go onto the website of Able Futures or Maximus and self-refer for this mental health support. And that is 9 months, up to 9 months of mental health coaching. It's not therapy, it is mental health coaching based for the workplace. And that is provided for you. So what I mean by that is you don't have to do any claims. And also you don't have control over who your mental health coach is. That will just be given to you based on availability. So in terms of grants, access to work, what they do is they agree with you that they're going to provide funding for very specific bits of support, which fit under a handful of categories, which I'll explain in a moment. And it's then your service users' responsibility to go away, get that support in place, and then claim the money back from access to work. So access to work does not liaise with suppliers of support workers, equipment, tech, coaching, anything like that. It's down to the claimant and their employer or anybody else who's supporting them to put that support in place and sort out the payments and sort out the claims. I'm going to go through the categories in a second, but I'm just going to touch on what access to work will not fund, because they have some very clear policies on this. The big things they definitely won't fund. So I noticed that at least one of you in the Mentimeter word wall said that they fund reasonable adjustments. So I want to be very clear that access to work does not fund reasonable adjustments. So reasonable adjustments are things that an employer is legally bound to provide to a disabled employee. And they are got to be reasonable, and a big part of reasonable is affordable for most people. So that's going to be the big bit of like, is this reasonable? Comes down to, is it affordable? And then an adjustment. So an adjustment to a normal way they do things or the kind of equipment or training they normally provide. The employer has a legal duty to do that, and access to work only provides support which is beyond that reasonable adjustment. So when they're looking at an individual case, they'll be looking at the size and resources of the employer and working out which bits of support they think the employer should be providing first as a reasonable adjustment, and then which things access to work should be providing, which goes beyond that. So in general, which is more expensive. They don't fund standard business costs. And standard business costs kind of change over time. So it's not very long ago that lots of people get sit-stand desks through access to work, but now, particularly in larger organisations, access to work might take a view that a sit-stand desk is a standard business cost. And certainly things like laptops, monitors, a relatively standard ergonomic mouse and keyboard, these are all things that for anything beyond a small organisation, there would be considered a level of standard business costs. And it needs to be, they won't provide support that is above minimum needs. Access to work is not there to help people thrive, although that's obviously a bonus. They're there to help give the minimum support they can to help people overcome the barriers they have to engaging well with their work. And when I say well, I mean meeting their performance criteria, turning up, not having sickness absence. I don't mean doing extremely well, getting lots of praise and progressing in their career. Okay, so just delving into some of these categories of support. So I'm going to go round my wheel I'm going to start as support workers. Support workers are a big one that lots of people apply to access to work for a support worker. A support worker is anybody who's providing one-on-one support to a disabled person, and they really vary in range, everything from British Sign Language interpreters through to lip speakers, through to note takers, carers, although we mean carers not so much in an intimate care way, but perhaps more like supporting somebody to physically access their workspace and maybe opening doors, carrying heavy objects, and that kind of thing. And then for neurodivergent people, the kind of support workers that are particularly relevant are job coaches, which I'm going to cover a little bit more later on in one of my examples, and job aids. So a job aid is often this kind of support worker that people are really asking for, and that's somebody who can help a disabled person to do their job. Like a British Sign Language interpreter is not allowed to do part of the job for them. A carer is not allowed to do part of the job, but a job aid can do part of the job. So for example, they can take over and make a phone call, or they could sit down and triage some emails. They're allowed to do that as part of their role. So support workers are considered to be kind of the last resort by Access to Work. Access to Work aims for independence where possible. So support workers do have to be, the case for a support worker has to be very clearly and well laid out, and they will push for claimants to try assistive technology and coaching and training options before funding a support worker. And we are going through quite a period of change with Access to Work, where they're really cutting back on both the hours of support work they're prepared to fund and also the hourly rate. So it can be very difficult for individuals who need a self-employed support worker or somebody from an agency, because they might have been given, say, £15 an hour, and that's just not enough to fund the support. So that's a bit of a topic for another day, but we are seeing really big cuts to that support worker funding. So people are struggling to get that at the moment. Coming around the wheel anti-clockwise, we've got coaching and training. So by coaching, I mean one-to-one coaching, which is normally maybe an average of 12 sessions. We have coping strategies training, and we have ADHD coaching or ADHD coaching. They're all very similar, but it's around individuals developing insight into why they struggle, or the barriers they face, and then coming up with specific coping strategies so that they can manage those tasks independently going forwards. So coaching is not something that can be kind of funded on an ongoing basis. It tends to be for 1 year. And training can be quite varied. So it can be assistive technology training for the individual. It can be training, disability awareness training for the team. So yeah, there's quite a few training options that can be funded. So special equipment. So it's got a little couple of stars here, just because if somebody's employed by a large employer, there's a possibility they may need to contribute towards this category. So when I say special equipment, I really mean kind of all the stuff that one might buy. So software, so assistive software, so things like software to magnify the screen, change the color and the contrast of text, AI note takers, stuff to do like Grammarly, things to help with composing text, voice control and dictation, so all the kind of different types of software that one could have. And then also equipment. So here it might be some level of ergonomic equipment if it's kind of beyond what would be considered standard, and things like remarkable tablets, things to take handwritten notes. The kind of software and equipment is going to really depend on the job that somebody is doing. So there's no list. It's what would be considered a disability need for that individual person in the context of the employment they do. So I can't say here's the list of the kinds of things, but we do have some common bits of software and equipment that would be funded for neurodivergent people. We've got travel. So travel is normally taxi support. So if somebody has to go to and from a location, either to get to work or during their working hours, and their disability means they can't drive or use public transport, then Access to Work can fund a taxi, which is very helpful. And then finally, adaptations. So adaptations, not normally so relevant to people who simply have neurodivergent conditions. We tend to think of them more, there tend to be physical adaptations to a workspace. So the installation of ramps, lifts, different types of fire alarm, to provide visual cues rather than just audio ones. So those kind of large adaptations to workplaces, and they are also may incur some kind of level of cost share to the employer. So the application process, I tend to think about it in 3 steps. So the first step being that an individual has to submit an application. So I tend to think of that as more broadly, the individual needs to understand the scheme, know that they're eligible, understand, what it is that they might be asking for support for. And then they have to fill in the application form or phone up the helpline and answer the questions verbally. And once they've done that, they go into a queue and they wait. The standard wait times are really long at the moment. So if somebody is already in their employment and they've become unwell or they realise they need support, then if they're employed, they're going to be waiting 9 to 10 months. And if they're self-employed, we're on about 14 to 15 months. So these are extremely long wait times. And the only way really to shorten that is to apply before you start your role. So if you apply within the 4 weeks before you start, so before day 1, then your application will be fast tracked and you should be dealt with kind of within the 4 to 6 week time scale. Then the next step is a case manager is going to contact you. You have one case manager from Access to Work to kind of gather lots of information from you, check that you're eligible, and then find out what kind of support you need and gather evidence for that so that they can make a funding decision. The key thing they're likely to do is send someone for a workplace needs assessment, which is an external assessment done by somebody independent from Access to Work, and they produce a report where they recommend very specific bits of support that somebody could have funded through Access to Work. The case manager then takes that and kind of applies Access to Work policies to it and comes out with a list of things that they're prepared to fund. Again, if people need other types of support, like their support worker or taxis, they're going to have to provide different bits of evidence and information depending on what they're asking for. So yeah, there's a big information gathering process, and then the case manager reaches a decision. Once they've done that, if their claimant is unhappy, they've got 4 weeks to challenge it, to request a reconsideration, but that process is long. So once they've requested it, we're looking maybe a 7 or 8 month wait for reconsideration to get a decision. So it's not going to be a short timescale to appeal. But putting that aside, they then have to implement the award. So they have to look through their award letter, find somebody to provide the technology, the coaching, the support worker. They have to purchase that stuff, and then they have to make claims to Access to Work to get the money back. And then on an ongoing basis, they might need to renew their award or do changes of circumstances. So it isn't once you've got your funding, you're done. It's an ongoing process that keeps going. Some things I just thought would be worth talking about considering the cohort that I'm talking to today. So benefits. Access to Work does not affect benefits in any way. The grant payments are not eligible for income tax. They don't count towards, they don't affect, oh gosh, my brain's gone. Anyway, income related benefits. But it's really important to point out to people that although Access to Work doesn't affect those benefits, working does. So you would only be getting Access to Work if you're working. So is the number of hours the person's working or the amount they're going to be earning going to affect their benefits? That's really the thing to consider there. Drugs and alcohol. So drug and alcohol addiction is not considered a disability under Access to Work. If they've got another disability that's not related to that, then that's fine. They can apply on that basis. Or if they have a disability or condition that is a consequence of drugs and alcohol, they can apply for that, but they will need to demonstrate that they are in a program, a rehabilitation program for that addiction. So they won't be able to get support for, say, an alcohol related condition like diabetes if they are not actively trying to manage that addiction. Another thing to think about is who's going to pay. I imagine that lots of your service users are not in a position to pay up money and then get it paid back to them. There are ways around that. Either their employer can pay and get the money back to them, or Access to Work can sometimes pay suppliers directly. But, thinking that through with them can really help. And finally, thinking about, do they have the skills to manage the application and manage the grant? Can they be supported to attain those skills? Do they need support, or do they need somebody to do it for them? It is a complicated, bureaucratic, administrative process to do this application, and it requires organisation, prioritisation, communication, advocacy, insight, and that's not necessarily people who, particularly who are disabled, have strong skills in unsupported. So I think Kerry now has a wrap up for us.
Yeah, so, well, one of the questions that I have is that we're constant, well, for anybody that's followed the news in this field is that access to work is very much on its knees, and that there's no point in applying. People keep saying to me, should I bother applying, because there's nothing left anymore, that people are not getting the money. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So access to work has gone through some brutal cuts over the last, say, 18 months. What we see in decisions is very different from 18 months to 2 years ago. However, that said, access to work is and still can be absolutely life-changing for the individuals that go through it. Some people have a really smooth process, and even if they don't, people still get life-changing funding for support. So recently I supported somebody with, I don't want to use the acronym, but I don't know what the full word is, POTS, post orthostatic something syndrome. People who blood pressure drops if they sit up or stand up, and she was funded £12,000 with no contribution for a reclined chair and desk setup, and that is fundamentally life-changing. It meant that she could continue to engage in work rather than lying in a painful position in her bed, which also felt very unprofessional. And people are getting, continuing to get support workers, interpreters, coaching. It's still worth doing, but I like people to understand. It's good if they go in understanding the process, so they're prepared perhaps for some of those difficulties. They get support with advocacy, they understand what it is they can and can't apply for, how to appeal. And yes, I still think it's extremely worth applying because it is a fabulous scheme, but it's just helpful to understand where problems might occur.
Just all those executive functions involved in actually applying. It's just the worst possible system that we could have. But yeah, we're here to try and help that if we can.
Absolutely.
All right. So we're going to go on now and look into the transitioning part, because most of us know a bit about access to work if you've got a job. But can you tell us a bit more then how this works for people who are transitioning into work?
Absolutely. So I have split, and this is not based on any particular model, this is based on my interpretation of transitioning into employment, but I've split this into 3 parts. The first one being kind of somebody getting ready for work, that's getting themselves to the point where they feel that they could apply for a job. Second part is all about kind of finding a role, the right role, doing that CV, skills, etc. And then finally starting and staying in employment. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit more. So the first one, in terms of getting ready for work, I've got some example activities here. This is not comprehensive, and there's going to be overlap between the 3 different stages, but it could be, for example, some health coaching. So, for example, the Work Well scheme, which has got pilots across the country, they're very much engaging in that kind of health coaching and bringing people to the point where they might be employment ready, so getting their health under control as far as possible, helping them manage it. Confidence building, training, peer support, volunteering, all stuff to help people get to the point where they feel that they are valuable to the workforce and that they have a right to have a job, they feel good about having a job, and that they feel confident to do those applications. The second part is all about finding a role. So some example activities would be identifying strengths and preferences, writing CVs, searching for jobs, making those applications, and also attending interviews. And then finally, when I'm talking about starting and staying in employment, I mean, kind of the point where you've got through an interview, you've been offered a job, so kind of agreeing reasonable adjustments, onboarding, learning and development, career progression, and meeting objectives. So just to set the scene, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about transitioning into employment. So where does access to work fit in? Well, it doesn't help you get ready for work. There's no part of it is going to work with a person who wants to become a job seeker, but their health or disability is making that difficult for them. Access to work is not going to get involved. So that's where people need to go to charities, the Work Well scheme, Connect to Work, the job centre, people who provide that kind of pre-employment support. Now, in terms of finding a role, no, access to work doesn't help there either. So access to work is not a scheme to help you with CV writing, finding jobs, doing applications. There's one exception, that they will fund communication support at a job interview. But that's really quite specific. So this would be if somebody needs to be a British Sign Language interpreter, so they might fund an hour or 2 hours of the interpreter's time to attend the interview. It's communication support. So it's not going to be support if somebody needs help getting to the interview, navigating public transport, understanding what the job interview is about in the first place. It's very much, so somebody who's autistic might have a support worker at the interview with them, but they'd only be funded for that time in the interview. So yeah, again, so if people need support finding a role, you're looking at charitable and government schemes to help people with that kind of job search process. And Neurorocket, I'm fairly confident, runs some schemes that fit somewhere between getting ready for work and finding a role. So the final stage, starting and staying in employment. This is where access to work comes in. So access to work is all about people who've already been offered a job, or they're already in a job, and that's the point at which access to work can step in and provide funding for that support. So it's really not going to help with anything really prior to that. Okay. So that's...
Sorry, I'm on mute. Talking to myself. Okay, so I've got another Mentimeter now. So I'll just pop that back up onto the screen. Okay, so based on what we've just discussed, what do you think would make what would be the biggest difference when starting a job for your people? So thinking about your service users, what's the kind of support that they really need? So it might not be something within this remit, but let's try and find out, because it's possible that we can look into things that we can help going forward in the future. But it'd be quite interesting just to think about this in relation to your service users. We might not get any answers. If you have no answers, that's absolutely fine. We're going to go into the next section, and then we'll ask the question after that and see if we have any more ideas. There we go. Just need some time. Okay, so we've got support worker interviews. So trying to get support in terms of helping, I think that means getting the support workers on board once you've been allocated that money. Getting the mentors, not sure what that means as yet, but we can come to that later on. Understanding, getting that support of understanding what actually is available, what you can do. Maybe that's what you mean. Communication support, and then we've also got I think this means making sure that the employer is already aware. That is a really big difficulty that we face at Neurorocket, is communication and educating employers. So we've got support worker, something else popped up and I've just missed it. Daily task list schedule. Okay, all right. I'm going to move on from this, and then we can come back and just take a screenshot of that so we can come back to it later if we've got any questions on that section. And I'm going to stop sharing that, and we'll go into the next section, which is going to talk us through the case studies.
Lovely, thank you, Kerry.
What are your case studies? What's going to be the key differences, Alice, with the case studies? You've got two different ones here.
I have, absolutely. So I think it's really important to note that there are as many journeys into employment as there are people who are transitioning. So I've picked out two that I feel are quite substantially different, particularly in the way that they might access to work. So I'm going to talk about one person who's gone through a supported employment route, and one person who has found their own employment relatively independently. Okay, so I haven't got any more slides from this, so I'm just going to talk around the subject, but I have written myself some notes about my case study. So we're going to look at the supported employment one first. So I have decided this is George. So George is a late teens, let's say 18 to 20. He's a care leaver, and he doesn't have much in the way of qualifications or work experience. He's autistic with some ongoing anxiety and some learning difficulties. And he has another acronym that I'm thinking, do I even know this? He's got an EHC plan, which is probably an education and healthcare plan. Let me just double check. Education, health and care plan. So there are a few options. Well, there's loads of, there are a myriad of options, but 3 big supported ones here. So he could consider a supported internship, which is for 16 to 25-year-olds who have that education, health and care plan, and are SEND. That is a full-time education and it's not paid normally. So it's mainly workplace-based learning, but it is study. There's a supported apprenticeship, which is what it sounds like. It's an apprenticeship under the normal apprenticeship scheme, but with just that extra level of support for people who are disabled. But in this case, we're going to assume that he's talked through those options and he's decided to go with supported employment, maybe because he's keen just to get started working and earning and moving on with that in his life, and he's not really interested in doing study. So George is taken on by a supported employment charity for autistic individuals. So this charity specialises in supporting autistic people into employment. So I'm just going to tell you what that means. Somebody has very kindly, because supported employment is not my specialist area, talked me through what this would look like. And from talking to people who do work in supported employment, it's quite clear that each organisation does it differently. So most of them would work on the supported employment model from the British Association for Supported Employment, which has several stages, but ultimately they have different ways of engaging with their service users. They may work to place them anywhere, or they might have a couple of different employers that they work with, or they might even employ themselves, like for example cafes who are staffed entirely by adults with learning disabilities. So here we've got an example. So George would have a little bit of an initial engagement with the organisation, so carrying out an initial meeting, explaining the service and kind of identifying any risks and safety measures. They then might spend around 6 weeks in kind of work development planning. So this is very much that pre-employment stage. So you'd have some weekly meetings and develop a work development plan covering support needs, current skills, any reasonable adjustments required, and the types of job of interest. They then transition into preparing for employment. So really that second part of my understanding. So creating a CV, applying for jobs, and also building relationships. This will be for the job coach, not the individual, but building relationships and engaging with employers to identify any suitable opportunities within George's preferences. So in this case, George has spotted a job at the in the parks department of the council, doing maintenance in the parks. So at that point, they're going to help him write his CV and also contact the council and the people advertising the job and talk them through, are they interested in doing supported employment? Would they be prepared to do these reasonable adjustments that George needs, and to engage with having a job coach and support in the work. They would then also probably support job at interview, and they would claim some of that money back from access to work. So the likelihood is they provide a job coach to support George to get to that interview and to conduct the interview, but they wouldn't be paid for all of that. So the charity kind of funds that some other way. So they support him through the interview, then they support him to discuss reasonable adjustments. So in this case, I've decided that George has got some part-time working just to help him manage, working is a really big deal, to kind of ease into that rather than going full-time. The council's going to give him some noise-cancelling headphones that he can wear while he's out doing his job, and that's fine. That's agreed that he can do that. There's no reason for the public to need to engage with him, and if they need to, he can take his headphones off. An agreement for him to take breaks in a silent place, quiet place that they look at in each park, just to make sure that he's comfortable and has somewhere to go. They're going to follow up any verbal instructions with something written or recorded so that he can reference that as he goes about his day. And when he has to go into the office, there's somewhere quiet for him to sit, and he'll get an agenda and a follow-up for any meetings he has to have. So that's all going to be negotiated, mediated by the supported employment organisation, the reasonable adjustments. But they definitely know they're going to have to apply to access to work, because a key part of supported employment is the provision of what we call a job coach whilst the person is in work. So in access to work, what that means is they will fund up to 6 months, 26 weeks of a job coach to support somebody to, not really quite sure what the right word is, but essentially to onboard, to learn the new job, to get to know their colleagues, get to know the social and cultural environment and the expectations upon them. And that job coach will have a support plan that tapers off over that 26 weeks. So it's aiming towards independence over the course of 6 months. And they will then apply to access to work to get that job coach funded. But the supported employment organisation might choose to give more support, but it won't be that they'll only be able to get a certain amount of support from access to work. So at the same time as funding that job coach, access to work will also do an assessment and provide other support for George. So in this case, after having, they've applied before he started his placement, so he's been put through access to work within 4 to 6 weeks. He's gone for a workplace needs assessment provided by access to work, and then his case manager has agreed to fund a brain and hand subscription for 3 years, so that once his job coach leaves, he will have kind of an app and a coaching environment and 24-hour assistance for him while he's, so after the job coach. So he's not just left entirely alone, he's going to have that ongoing support. I can explain brain and hand for anyone who doesn't actually know what it means, so I apologise for that. They're going to fund some neurodiversity awareness training for his team, so that they all kind of have a good foundational knowledge of neurodiversity and what that means and how to support somebody. They're going to fund an AI note taker for his phone. So when he gets his verbal instructions in the morning from his manager, the head maintenance person at the parks, he can record that, and then he can both listen to it and also read an AI summary just outlining what those points are, the things he needs to do going about his day. They've also given him read and write, which is a kind of text to speech plus some extra stuff to help people who struggle with reading to manage that. And they're going to give him Grammarly so he can write some nice professional messages and emails when he needs to. So that's quite a lot of stuff. So access to work can provide quite a lot of stuff, and he's definitely going to need support from his supported employment organisation and his employer to support him to implement that, and they will help him get that in place, and then they'll probably do the claims for him for at least for a while. And all of that would be fully funded, even though it's the council, because he's going to apply before he starts in his job. Okay, so that's George. So in contrast, I'm going to talk about Sybil, who's going to find her own employment. So a bit of background about Sybil. She's in her 40s, she's older, she has ADHD, late diagnosed, and she's also an alcoholic with alcohol-related diabetes at this stage. She also has complex PTSD, so some mental health issues there. She's been out of the workforce for a while, but she does have previous experience in the workforce, and she has a reasonable level of education. But she's had a period of homelessness and alcoholism that has kind of disrupted her working time. So now she's become stable, she's sought treatment for her alcoholism, she's found stable housing, and she's starting to think about moving into employment. So she's claiming employment support allowance and PIP. So she's very much going to be looking for work within the permitted work for ESA, which means she needs to work less than 16 hours a week and earn roughly £13 per hour after tax. So she's found a job for 12 hours. She's found this herself. She's done her own job search. She wanted to have that control over it. She hasn't gone to a charity. She's done this herself, and she's found a position for 12 hours a week as a volunteer coordinator for a local charity. So she has spotted the opportunity. She's filled in an application. She sent the CV, and then she's gone for an interview by herself. At that point, she's been offered the job, which is fantastic. And because she's been supported by you guys, she knows about access to work, and she knows that she needs to apply before she starts her job so that she doesn't wait 10 months. So she does that, and at the same time she starts talking to her employer about reasonable adjustments. So her employer agrees to give her some flexible working, so allowing her to kind of not necessarily have exactly the same start and end time each day, hybrid working, mainly working from home, and time off for her medical appointments, which she still has quite a lot of. And in terms of access to work, so she applies to access to work. They contact her again quite quickly, within 4 to 6 weeks. Her case manager sends her off for a workplace needs assessment, because that is really very standard. They provide their list of recommendations, and the case manager from those recommendations has decided to provide coping strategies coaching to help Sybil identify how the various disabilities she has are affecting her at work and how she can put strategies in place to manage them. They've also given her some co-coaching, so 2 sessions of co-coaching, which means coaching shared between her and her line manager, so they can kind of develop a working relationship and strategies together. And then in terms of her home working, because it's a small charity, they funded a multi-position chair so she can move around and change position and stay focused. Similar reasons, a sit-stand desk so that she's able to kind of move around and stim and maintain that focus on her work, and a rocking for a rest. They've also given her a body doubling subscription, which may be interesting to try and see if that helps her to remain focused while at work. And then they've given some other software. So they've given her mind mapping, which is brilliant for neurodivergent people in terms of formulating thoughts in a non-linear way, and a remarkable tablet for distraction-free kind of note-taking and being able to organise those notes. And they've told her that if she thinks she was a bit like, oh, I'd love a support worker, but they said, come back, we've given you quite a lot of stuff. Give it 12 months and then see if you still feel the need for a support worker, which is a very sensible approach given that she doesn't know what support she needs, and hopefully she can be independent in the workplace. And now she has to manage this process by herself because she's not working in the charity, so she has to put this support in place, do the purchases and do the claims. And that is my case studies.
Okay, all right. So thank you for that. Can you just tell us what Brain in Hand is, please?
Yes. Brain in Hand is a bit of a mishmash, that's not how they describe it, of coaching and assistive technology. So it's an app, and it's all about coping strategies, but it's taking coaching can help you come up with coping strategies, but then you've got to try and implement them on a daily basis, which is obviously a challenge, out of sight, out of mind. So Brain in Hand integrates coaching with their app, which basically is all to do with kind of starting to look for when you might have issues and pre-planning your strategies. So looking at your calendar for the day and saying, okay, I know I'm going to get the bus into town. I know that if the bus is late, that's the kind of thing that sends me into a spin and I might have a meltdown. So what are my strategies? And put them in the app so that I can have them immediately, listen to some music while I'm waiting, call a taxi, call a friend, whatever it is, so that you're having to do less of that thinking about strategies in the moment. It's also got a 24-hour help crisis. It's not crisis line. They're very much not there for mental health crises, but you can press a panic button and somebody will contact you within 30 minutes, which is really one of the big sells of Brain in Hand. And it goes really well alongside other coaching. It's not an either or. It's not like you should have Brain in Hand or coaching. They can work really well complementary together.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're just going to give people a minute to catch up and make any notes, think about questions that they have, because we're going to do a little bit more about, you're going to look at help and support, and then we're going to go into the question section. I suppose we would like people to reflect on this and think about, is there anything that you want to implement with your service users? Is there anything that you need to research, find out, what action steps can you take as a result of the information that we're giving you? So we're just going to give you 2 minutes and then we'll move on. All right, that was the longest 2 minutes of my life. All right, Alice, onto the last section.
Well, last couple of sections, but they should be quite short. So in terms of how you can support somebody who's going through access to work, I'm really just going to go through the same little thing I said before, but just with more of an emphasis on kind of what you could do here. So if somebody's going to be submitting an application, well, first of all, I'd be thinking, is there somebody who can support them more holistically? So for example, would they be better placed with a supported employment organisation, a supported internship, a supported apprenticeship, rather than going alone? And if they are, signposting them to one of those organisations, like local to the Nottingham area. But if they're going to do it by themselves, and supporting them to understand the scheme, so maybe helping them understand and read through the fact sheet that Access to Work provides, which Kerry can send you the links to, helping to really be sure that they are eligible for the scheme, and have a think about what kind of support they might be applying for. You can also then actually help them fill out the application. The application itself, it takes maybe an hour to an hour and a half. It has got some longer questions in it, so they need to explain how their disabilities affect them at work and how support they're asking for is going to help them overcome those difficulties or barriers. So really helping them work through that form, and also giving them an idea of the kind of timescales you want them to know. If it's going to be a 9 or 10 month wait, you don't want them to be thinking it might happen in 4, 5, 6 weeks. And then in terms of once they've been contacted by a case manager, really this is about communication and advocacy. Self-advocacy is very hard for everybody. And if you've also got challenges with communication, that makes it much harder. So case managers often want to have phone calls, so sitting in on phone calls just to support people, to make sure that they're saying the things they want to say, and that the case managers are treating them with respect, can be really helpful. But also making sure that they keep records is really helpful to keep people organized. So recording calls, keeping logs of emails, so that they know, and making sure that people are providing information and paperwork to the timescales that Access to Work gives them, because otherwise their application can be closed. And then implementing and managing the award. This can be it is difficult. They've got 13 weeks to implement the award, and then they've got 9 months from each purchase date to claim the money. And 13 weeks can go very quickly. You might spend a couple of weeks waiting for the letters to come through, and then people are away on holiday or busy. So helping people work out where they're going to get the support from. Is their employer going to arrange it? Are they going to arrange it? Who's going to actually make the purchase? They have to make the claim either by paper or on an online portal, and they can obviously have support with that, but the claim process is for them to do. It's not for their employer to do. So kind of supporting them with the administration that comes with setting up the support. And then I'll just go straight into help and support. So in terms of how you can, both support yourself in terms of having the knowledge to support other people, but also things you can direct people to. So as Kerry says, we run regular free info sessions on Access to Work, and we do that in a series of 3. So we do before you apply, just all of that kind of understanding what Access to Work is, covering some of the same information that we've covered today. Part 2, preparing for contact with a case manager. So really understanding what that process looks like, what the workplace needs assessment looks like, how your case manager makes decisions, and what the contact will actually look like in terms of emails, calls, that kind of thing. And then the final one is all about challenging an award, so making a request for reconsideration if they're unhappy, and implementing, but making claims, making purchases. People kind of book through Eventbrite, and again that link should be sent to you. We also have one-on-one support. So Neurorocket very kindly, they've got some funding for some free stuff, so either yourselves can have a free 30-minute session with me, or you could signpost claimants to have a free 30 minutes. As Kerry says, what we do want to avoid is people using that time for questions that could be answered in the generic webinars. So we might ask you what it is you want to cover, and really we're looking for, in an ideal world, people would have watched the webinars, but obviously particularly the final one only comes around every 4 months, so that might take quite a while, and you're like, oh, I need support now. But really we're looking for those kind of all the things you've been said, don't ask today, the very case specific, the complex, the how do we apply these guidelines to this individual nuanced circumstances, rather than just kind of what's the scheme, what does it do, who's eligible, how do you claim. And then beyond the funded stuff, people can also pay for my support privately, and we'll send you the links for that. Some kind of online resources. So there's official guides. So Access to Work have a whole published staff guide. That's more than most people need to read, but it does give a lot of information, because it's it's the policies that the case managers work off. But they also have some more accessible fact sheets. So they have a fact sheet for people going through the scheme. They also have a fact sheet for employers. And you can actually phone the helpline to ask questions, but you might wait an hour to get through. There's some free online communities. So Kerry has set up a Facebook group, which is obviously great. We can both answer questions in there. It's also worth noting in terms of being professionals, there's a LinkedIn group called the Access to Work Collective. And there's a few hundred people in that, and very much people who it's individuals with claims, but it's also a lot of people who work professionally to support people with access to work, sitting within supported employment organisations, sitting within charities, sitting within assisted tech organisations. So that's a really good place to kind of network professionally. And there are others. So if you search for access to work in any of the social media platforms, you're going to find some kind of group and community around that. And that's the end of me talking.
Thank you very much, Alice.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Yeah, I think that you've answered so many questions today. Thank you. We really appreciate you giving your time for this webinar. I'm going to hand over now to Justine, who's going to facilitate the questions because I can't see them.
Thank you, Kerry and Alice. Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you for going through that in such detail. That was really helpful. We haven't got any questions in the Q&A box, so we'll just hold on and see if anyone has got anything that they want to ask, just for a few minutes, and see if anyone comes back with anything. So yeah, if anyone has got anything, if you can pop those in the Q&A box, and then we can put them to Kerry and Alice. Otherwise,
can I just ask a quick question whilst we're waiting?
Yeah, of course.
Alice, can you just clarify the difference between a job coach and a job aid?
I absolutely can. So a job coach it's a term that's used for a few different things, which is unhelpful. So sometimes people refer to a job coach in that kind of pre-employment phase, kind of helping people get ready for work and find work. That's not what we mean when we're talking about access to work. A job coach is normally somebody who has a qualification in being a job coach. Being a job coach is kind of it's a thing. And it's really related to supported employment. So it's not something that somebody would just generally be. And they are a temporary but quite intense one-on-one support for somebody who is new to a job, and normally who would be autistic or have learning disabilities or maybe mental health issues. So they work probably in person, particularly for quite a lot of the time. So they might be there every day to start with, helping that person learn what they're meant to do, kind of what they're meant to do at meetings, how they're meant to communicate with their colleagues, helping them advocate for themselves when they're kind of requesting reasonable adjustments. And then they would gradually tail off that support, so that at 6 months that person is ready to go, or they say, actually, we need some ongoing support, and then they would apply for an ongoing support worker. Now, a job aid, I accept it's a very similar term, is a very different person. So this is an ongoing support worker, so there's no time cap on that. It doesn't need to be for somebody who's new into a role, and it's not limited to people who have autism, mental health issues, or learning disabilities. It's a bit of a catch-all. It's somebody who's helping you do your job, and that could be in a multitude of ways. It could be things like communication support, so helping you to understand the meaning of emails and compose professional replies. It could be helping you to it could be doing some things for you. So let's say every morning they log on to emails for half an hour and kind of flag the things that need to be dealt with today, although kind of doing things for you is capped and is not the point of a job aid. A job aid, the ideal for a job aid is that they enable you to do your tasks yourself. So they kind of just a tool where assistive technology can't support you, or strategies isn't going to cover it. The job aid is there to really help you in any way that you need because of your disabilities, to help you do that task. But they can replace you if that is what's needed, and that you can't do the task even with support. But in an ideal world, they are very much supporting you to do it. So the good example there being emails. So the difference between they could log on and do your emails for you, or they could sit with you and work through that process of triaging and working out who to reply to and what to say, and just kind of helping you with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alice. So we have got a question, then it asks, can a claimant ask for a grant for the workplace needs assessment if they know their barriers but not their solutions, especially if they're about to start a job?
Okay. So you don't ask for a grant. Okay. Yes, I think what the question means is, can you apply if you don't know what you need? And the answer is absolutely yes. So you can put the application in, you can say what your difficulties are, but then you can tick for every category, I don't know if this will be helpful, I don't know, and then just say, I need a workplace needs assessment. So what the case manager would do is they gather some information about you, but then they would probably just pretty much refer you straight on for this workplace needs assessment. And then they would have maybe an hour's conversation with an assessor who would then make those recommendations. I personally recommend that everyone has a workplace needs assessment because they're very helpful. But yes, absolutely, you can go into Access to Work with no understanding of what support you might need and rely on that assessment to help you identify that and make those recommendations.
Ultimately, we don't know what we don't know, so we always recommend someone to get an assessment to find out what support there is.
In an ideal world, it would be good for them to have had some conversations before the assessment and to have kind of had a bit of a think about what support they might need with somebody who understands the range of support available. Just because the assessments aren't very long, an hour is not actually that long to get to know somebody, fully understand it and make recommendations. And sometimes they're over in 40 minutes. So in an ideal world, it will be good for somebody to have already spent some time thinking and discussing this, at least to know what their difficulties are and be able to communicate those. But if that's not something that they have capacity for, it's fine. They can just turn up to the work assessment pretty much without any prep and expect to get some useful recommendations out of it.